Two men that wrestled with God. Number 1. Habakkuk. Habakkuk's name means to wrestle or embrace, and he indeed battled with crucial concerns regarding the world and God's plan. Habakkuk brought his questions to the Lord. In the book named after him, we discover what Habakkuk says, sees, and sings, and we learn how to deal with life's big questions. Number 1. Habakkuk's turmoil. What he says. We're listening to a conversation between the prophet and the Lord. "O Lord, how long shall I cry and you will not hear?" Habakkuk started with a bold question. Habakkuk chapter 1 verses 1 through 2. The oracle, a burdensome message, a pronouncement from God which Habakkuk the prophet saw. "O Lord, how long will I call for help and you will not hear? I cry out to you violence, yet you do not save. Even though I scream to you violence, you will not save." Habakkuk was grappling with the twofold mystery of God's divine providence. He was perplexed by God's seeming inactivity. People were sinning, and God appeared to be doing nothing to stop it. Then he described Judah's transgressions and lamented the fact that wicked people seemed to have the upper hand. Justice was a hoax. God answered Habakkuk's question by saying, Habakkuk chapter 1 verses 5 through 10. The Lord replied, "Look among the nations, see, be astonished, wonder, for I am doing something in your days. You would not believe it if you were told. For behold, I am raising up the Chaldeans who rule in Babylon, that fierce and impetuous nation who march throughout the earth to take possession of dwelling places that do not belong to them. The Chaldeans are dreaded and feared. Their justice and authority originate with themselves, and are defined only by their decree. Their horses are swifter than leopards, and keener than hungry wolves in the evening. Their horsemen come galloping. Their horsemen come from far away. They fly like an eagle swooping down to devour. They all come for violence. Their horde of faces moves eagerly forward. They gather prisoners like sand. They make fun of kings, and rulers are a laughing matter to them. They ridicule every stronghold and heap up rubble for earth mounds and capture it. Then God explained how he would punish his people for their transgressions by sending the horrible Chaldeans, Babylonians. Habakkuk chapter 1 verses 12 through 17. The prophet's second question. Are you not from everlasting, O Lord my God, my Holy One? We shall not die. O Lord, you have appointed them for judgment, O Rock. You have marked them for correction. You are of purer eyes than to behold evil, and cannot look on wickedness. Why do you look on those who deal treacherously, and hold your tongue when the wicked devours a person more righteous than he? Why do you make men like fish of the sea, like creeping things that have no ruler over them? They take up all of them with a hook. They catch them in their net, and gather them in their dragnet. Therefore they rejoice and are glad. Therefore they sacrifice to their net and burn incense to their dragnet. Because by them their share is sumptuous and their food plentiful. Shall they therefore empty their net and continue to slay nations without pity? God's response did not appease Habakkuk. Rather, it seemed to create a larger concern about God's ability, as well as his apparent inconsistency. Lord, I don't understand this inactivity either, Habakkuk said. But now you tell me you're going to punish your own people with a people far worse than they are? What exactly is going on here? We frequently have questions like these because God's acts appear to contradict what we know about His character. When confronted with life's troubles, the first step should be to address them directly to God. Your openness poses no threat to Him. Even our Lord on the cross asked why. Habakkuk's Tower, what he sees. Habakkuk chapter 2 verses 1 through 2. I will stand at my guard post and station myself on the tower, and I will keep watch to see what he will say to me, and what answer I will give as a spokesman when I am reproved. Then the Lord answered me and said, Write the vision, and engrave it plainly on clay tablets, so that the one who reads it will run. God instructed Habakkuk to write his word in huge letters, so that everyone could read it. The first statement made by God is that time is important. Habakkuk chapter 2 verse 3. For the vision is yet for the appointed future time. It hurries toward the goal of fulfillment. It will not fail. Even though it delays, wait patiently for it, because it will certainly come. It will not delay. He may appear slow in his acting, but bear with him, because his timing is perfect. Because God is in control, timing is essential. We reside in the shadow of two massive peaks. The first is the birth mountain, and the final is the death mountain. We exist in the valley of time between these 2 points. God is in complete control of His actions. We only await His arrival. Habakkuk chapter 2 verses 9 through 19. Woe to him who covets evil gain for his house, that he may set his nest on high, that he may be delivered from the power of disaster. You give shameful counsel to your house, cutting off many peoples, and sin against your soul. For the stone will cry out from the wall, and the beam from the timbers will answer it. Woe to him who builds a town with bloodshed, who establishes a city by iniquity. Behold, is it not of the Lord of hosts that the peoples labor to feed the fire, and nations weary themselves in vain? For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. Woe to him who gives drink to his neighbor, pressing him to your bottle, even to make him drunk, that you may look on his nakedness. You are filled with shame instead of glory. You also drink, and be exposed as uncircumcised. The cup of the Lord's right hand will be turned against you, and utter shame will be on your glory. For the violence done to Lebanon will cover you, and the plunder of beasts which made them afraid, because of men's blood and the violence of the land and the city, and of all who dwell in it. What profit is the image that its maker should carve it? The molded image, a teacher of lies, that the maker of its mold should trust in it to make mute idols. Woe to him who says to wood, Awake, the silent stone, Arise, it shall teach. Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, yet in it there is no breath at all. Continuing through the chapter, we see 4 woe passages in which God highlights sins common to that culture and ours: covetousness, violence, seduction, and idolatry. God was stating that He would deal with those issues in His perfect timing. Then God responded, For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. That is a prophecy of the second coming of Christ. I'm coming, God said, and I'll solve all of these problems. We must learn to wait on the Lord. So, how should we spend our time while we wait? By faith we live. This text focuses on 2 types of people in the world: The first type has faith in themselves. They are saved based on who they are and what they do. The righteous shall live by his faith. It's a matter of trust, God was saying to Habakkuk and to us. Habakkuk chapter 2 verse 20. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. But the Lord is in his holy temple, God declared. Let the entire earth be silent in his presence. That is the third and most crucial answer to life's questions. Habakkuk's triumph, what he sings. We find a changed man here. Habakkuk has gone from wailing to singing, from gloom to glory, and from question marks to exclamation points. He started this writing in the valley and finished it on top of a mountain. What has changed? Neither God nor Habakkuk's circumstances were to blame. Instead, Habakkuk had learned to trust in the Lord and was preparing to sing. Notice the music terms all through the chapter. Habakkuk chapter 3 verse 1. The prophet's prayer. A prayer of Habakkuk the prophet on Shigionoth. On Shigionoth, a prayer of Habakkuk the prophet. That's a musical expression. And as stated in the chapter's final sentence, Habakkuk chapter 3 verse 19. The Lord God is my strength. He will make my feet like deer's feet, and he will make me walk on my high hills. To the chief musician, with my stringed instruments. That is, it should be used for congregational music accompanied by an orchestra. Habakkuk chapter 3 verses 3 through 13. God came from Teman, the Holy One from Mount Piran. Selah. His glory covered the heavens, and the earth was full of his praise. His brightness was like the light. He had rays flashing from his hand, and there his power was hidden. Before him went pestilence, and fever followed at his feet. He stood and measured the earth. He looked and startled the nations, and the everlasting mountains were scattered. The perpetual hills bowed. His ways are everlasting. I saw the tents of Cushan in affliction. The curtains of the land of Midian trembled. O Lord, were you displeased with the rivers? Was your anger against the rivers? Was your wrath against the sea, that you rode on your horses, your chariots of salvation? Your bow was made quite ready. Oaths were sworn over your arrows. Selah. You divided the earth with rivers. The mountains saw you and trembled. The overflowing of the water passed by. The deep uttered its voice and lifted its hands on high. The sun and moon stood still in their habitation. At the light of your arrows they went, at the shining of your glittering spear. You marched through the land in indignation. You trampled the nations in anger. You went forth for the salvation of your people, for salvation with your anointed. You struck the head from the house of the wicked, by laying bare from foundation to neck. Selah. This is a song of prayer. Habakkuk was singing a plea to the Lord for revival. That is the ultimate cure to everything. Revival. God is the one who fixes life's difficulties. God is the one who solves our society's problems. God knows the solutions that the government does not. The answer is not found in social services, but in God. God is capable of sending revival. The next phrase refers to God coming down. The sentences that follow retrace the steps of the children of Israel on their trip through the wilderness. The emphasis is on God coming down and being there all along the journey. If God could do it in the past, He can certainly do it now. God has not changed or diminished in strength. We should be asking God to come down and bring revival to America. Habakkuk chapter 3 verses 17 through 18. A hymn of faith. Though the fig tree may not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, though the labor of the olive may fail, and the fields yield no food, though the flock may be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. This is a praise song as well. Consider how verses 17 and 18 are linked. Verse 17 begins with though, whereas verse 18 begins with yet. Regardless of the circumstances, Habakkuk was saying yet. Regardless of what happens, yet. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord, in the God of my salvation. That is the fourth response to the unresolved problems of life. Keep joyful in the Lord in all circumstances. Habakkuk then concluded by saying that God was his strength. Habakkuk didn't have all the answers, but he put his faith in his powerful God who did. God appointed Habakkuk, a contemporary of Jeremiah and Ezekiel, to lead in tumultuous times. His name means to embrace, and he earned it by wrestling with God at the beginning of his book and attaining intimate closeness with God by the end. Leadership with no easy answers could have been the title of Habakkuk's book. This prophet pondered why God permitted the people of Judah to continue in their immoral and evil ways. He cried out to God, but had no response at first. God seems far too tolerant for Habakkuk's tastes. Finally, God revealed to him his plan to correct the problem by bringing up Babylon to plunder and capture Judah in war. Habakkuk was now in a new situation. Would God really employ a nation even more evil than Judah to correct Judah? This seemed preposterous to him. So he presented God with an integrity check. Do you really know what you are doing here? When God answered his question, he learned to trust and ended the book with a beautiful psalm of faith. Habakkuk teaches us to be praying leaders. The entire book is a dialogue between God and him, and it is the only book in the Bible that is put out in this manner. As a prophet, Habakkuk had to feed the people and guide the people. But first, he had to intercede for the people. Far too often, those of us in positions of leadership are doers who lose sight of this critical duty. In the New Testament, Peter stated that he would devote himself to two things: the Word of God and prayer. This is the first task of a spiritual leader. Habakkuk also tells us that it is permissible to challenge God. We should have such a close relationship with God that we can freely communicate our questions, worries, or bewilderment about God's methods. When we don't know what to do, we should turn to God for guidance. Habakkuk posed precise and specific queries. Leaders must be confident enough to confess they don't know everything and seek guidance from God. Finally, the most important leadership value we can learn from Habakkuk is trust. He knew he wasn't in control any more than we are today. He waited for God. When God finally spoke, Habakkuk had to trust him because he didn't understand. In essence, his final psalm says, "Although I don't understand what's going on and nothing is going the way I want it to, I'll still rejoice and trust God's wisdom." Habakkuk must learn to follow God as the leader. In the beginning, the Lord remains silent and teaches his leader to wait. He eventually replies to Habakkuk's criticism in an unexpected way and teaches his leader to trust. He later demonstrates his supreme sovereignty over all things and encourages his leader to rejoice regardless of the circumstances. The way God treats Habakkuk elevates him to a whole new level of leadership. May God do the same for each of us. Number 2. Jacob. Jacob is mentioned for the first time in the Bible in Genesis chapter 25. When Rebekah, Jacob's mother, was pregnant with him and his fraternal twin Esau, she asked God why her two babies were fighting in her womb. God responded that the animosity between the two brothers foreshadowed the two nations that would emerge from them. Jacob would be the forefather of Israel, and Esau of Edom. Furthermore, Esau, the elder twin, would become Jacob's, the younger twin, servant. Jacob was associated with trickery and deception from his birth until his wrestling match with God. Jacob's most infamous deceptions were committed against his twin brother Esau. In exchange for his birthright as the firstborn son, which was a double portion of his father Isaac's inheritance, Jacob offered his famished brother a bowl of soup. Furthermore, Jacob deprives Esau of their father's blessing, which Esau was entitled to receive. This resulted in Esau wanting to slay his younger brother. So Jacob fled. On his way to his mother's homeland, he saw angels and a ladder to heaven. When Jacob arrives in Haran, he meets his match in the form of his uncle Laban. Despite his feelings for Laban's younger daughter Rachel, Jacob is duped into marrying her older sister Leah. Jacob, on the other hand, perseveres and is eventually able to marry the object of his affections. Jacob worked for Laban for many years. Jacob was able to take much of Laban's herd for himself, thanks to God's protection and Jacob's intelligence. Finally, God tells Jacob to return to his father's land. The problem is that this means Jacob will have to confront Esau. Will his brother's rage remain unquenched after all these years? Knowing Jacob's story means knowing that his life was full of ups and downs. Despite God's promise to Jacob that through him would come not only a great nation but a whole company of nations, he was a fearful and anxious man. Jacob was about to meet his brother Esau, who had vowed to kill him at a critical juncture in his life. All of Jacob's struggles and fears were about to come true. Jacob had fled Laban, enraged by his father-in-law's treatment, only to be met by his enraged brother Esau. Anxious for his life, Jacob devised a bribe and sent a caravan of gifts across the river Jabbok with his women and children in the hopes of appeasing his brother. He was stripped of all his worldly possessions because he was physically exhausted, alone in the desert wilderness, and facing certain death. In reality, he had no control over his fate. On the banks of the Jabbok River, he fell into a deep sleep. With his father-in-law behind him and Esau ahead of him, he was too exhausted to fight any longer. But it wasn't until then that his true struggle began. Fleeing his family history had been difficult enough. Wrestling with God himself was an entirely different matter. That night, Jacob was visited by an angelic stranger. Jacob had struggled his entire life. Even at the time of his birth, he was at odds with Esau. Later, he clashed with Laban. Yet just before meeting Esau, Jacob went through the most difficult time of his life. He who had once grasped his brother's heel now clung to the living God's bodily form. Genesis chapter 32, verses 24 through 32. So Jacob was left alone, and a man came and wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he had not prevailed against Jacob, he touched his hip joint, and Jacob's hip was dislocated as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you declare a blessing on me." So he asked him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." And he said, "Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please, tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And he declared a blessing of the covenant promises on Jacob there. So Jacob named the place Peniel, the face of God, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, yet my life has not been snatched away." Now the sun rose on him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Therefore to this day the Israelites do not eat the tendon of the hip which is on the socket of the thigh, because he touched the socket of Jacob's thigh by the tendon of the hip. Note that Jacob is 97 years old at this point in the narrative. As a result, he is unlikely to pose a physical challenge to an angel. Though there is no reason to doubt that a physical contest takes place, we must not mistake that for the main point. When the text tells us that Jacob's opponent cannot overcome him, it is not suggesting that Jacob is physically besting the man. The ease with which he inflicts physical damage on Jacob indicates this. The turning point occurs when Jacob informs the stranger that he will not release him unless such assurances are provided. This, I believe, indicates Jacob's willingness to submit to God's demands on him. Jacob's perseverance is now working in his favor. He is willing to go to any length. The blessing manifests itself in the form of a name change. This is significant for Jacob, because his name had become synonymous with his character throughout the story. A name change thus denotes a change in character. Changing someone's name was a way to exert authority over them. Jacob accepts the name change, which is equivalent to accepting a change in character in this case. The new name is intended to represent the transformation of one of Jacob's traditional strengths. His perseverance has brought him success in his interactions with people, and it is now responsible for his success in his struggle with God. Not because God has surrendered, but because Jacob has conceded. As is customary with God, one must first lose in order to win. It's possible that Jacob's request for the wrestler's name is a last-ditch effort to maintain control, but the wrestler refuses. Who exactly is this stranger? Throughout the episode, the narrator refers to him as a man. At the end of the episode, Jacob refers to the person as Elohim. The man injures Jacob's hip, but he refuses to let go until the man blesses him. Jacob realized he wasn't wrestling a man, but God, and he wouldn't let go until he blessed him. The location of the wrestling match is named Peniel, which means face of God in Hebrew. Here are takeaways from Jacob's wrestling match with God. First, we need forgiveness, and it only comes by the mercy of God. Jacob was responsible for what he did to Esau, and he knew it. Jacob had relied on his own wits for success up until this point, but now he didn't know what would happen. His survival was contingent on his brother forgiving him for his wrongdoings. Although Jacob had no control over his brother's heart, there was one who did. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. Genesis chapter 32, verse 24. It was time for Jacob to realize that he couldn't rely on his own strength any longer. He had no control over the forgiveness he needed to survive. If we are to follow God, we must first admit our flaws and weaknesses. Only God's mercy can forgive us, and only God's grace can see us through to the other side of the night. Jacob possessed two admirable characteristics. One of them had a spiritual sensitivity. This was seen when he fled from his brother and saw the ladder to heaven, and again when he obeyed the Lord's voice telling him to return to his homeland. His perseverance is exemplified by his pursuit of Rachel and his patience in serving Laban in order to win her hand in marriage. In his struggle with a mysterious man, Jacob exemplifies both qualities. He recognized that he was wrestling with God, and he refused to give up until God blessed him. What made this even more powerful were the moral ramifications Jacob was facing. He didn't deserve the blessing, but he was willing to accept whatever judgment or consequence came with it. The ramifications were not insignificant. The wrestling match had rendered him immobile, but God had given him his blessing. As we continue reading Genesis, we see Jacob's name changing back and forth from his old to his new throughout his life. God reminds Jacob of his new name once more in Genesis chapter 35, verse 10. This is something that frequently happens to us. God calls us his beloved, a new creation in him, but we forget who we are. We should cling to our new identity after we've wrestled with God. We may make mistakes and lose sight of who we are, but we can always return to what God has called us to be. God wants us to know him intimately. And Jacob asked him and said, "Tell me, I pray thee, thy name." And he said, "Wherefore is it that thou dost ask after my name?" And he blessed him there. Genesis chapter 32, verse 29. Jacob understood who God was. He was aware that God was the God of his father and grandfather. However, the God Jacob wrestled with through the Jabbok was God in the form of man, the part of the Trinity who would come to earth and bear. Who his own self bare our sins in his own body on the tree, that we, being dead to sins, should live unto righteousness, by whose stripes ye were healed. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 24. God became the God of Jacob's heart during the wrestling match. Many people are aware of God, but have never had a genuine life-changing encounter with him. Understanding what God has done for others is not the same as comprehending what he has done for you. God is far more concerned with the state of our hearts than with how successfully we appear to be living a righteous life. Spending time with God is the only way to have a relationship with him. Reading the Bible, praying and worshiping with our hearts and minds completely focused on God brings us closer, more intimately into his presence. The greatest impediment to spending time with God is sometimes ourselves. Our priorities become muddled. I know that starting my day by spending time in God's Word and or praying makes the rest of the day go more smoothly. The events of my day do not change, but my attitude does, because God's peace is with me. Closeness to God requires humility. The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Genesis chapter 32, verse 31. This physical disability was a sign of his new humility for the proud, self-sufficient, quick-witted Jacob. Merriam-Webster defines humility as freedom from pride or arrogance. In today's world, humility appears to be anti-culture and anti-success. In God's world, however, we become better people when we put our pride aside and rely on Him. God humbled many biblical figures, including Jacob. Similar stories can be found in Simon Peter and Saul's conversion to Paul. No one would want to go through life with a disability or ailment to keep them humble. But God knows what we need, and that our dependence on Him instead of ourselves is our greatest strength. The sun was rising on Jacob as he limped away. He had a new ailment, but also a new identity, a new name, and a new intimacy with God. When God makes us wrestle with Him for some blessings, it is not because God is hesitant to bless us, even if it appears that way at first. It's because He has more blessings for us when we wrestle than when we don't. Remember that God settled Jacob for this match. God was the catalyst. When God appeared, Jacob was stewing in his own anxiety over Esau and his approaching slaughter squad. And the wrestling drew Jacob out of his fearful trance and forced him to concentrate on God. Continue to wrestle. What do you really need from God right now? Do not let God go until He blesses you. In your anguish, fear, and uncertainty, God will meet you. However, He may not meet you in the manner you expect or desire. Your greatest ally may appear at first to be your adversary, prompting you to wrestle with him. If so, keep Jacob in mind. There are numerous benefits to wrestling. You may not require soft words of comfort. You may not require time alone with your thoughts. You may not require sleep. And you may not even require a healthy hip. What you require is God's favor. When God invites you to wrestle with Him in prayer, it is an invitation to receive His blessing. Continue to stick with Him and don't give up. Don't let go of Him until He blesses you. He loves the blessed, tenacious faith, and you will be transformed as a result. Today, we, like Jacob, can enter into a relationship with Christ by confessing our sins and declaring God to be our Savior and Redeemer. God can give us a new life as His children by admitting our brokenness to Him, and we can enter into an eternal relationship with Him, full of His blessings and good promises for our lives. Through His new name, Israel, Jacob was able to experience a new identity. Similarly, when we come to know Christ, we undergo a transformation. Everything changes. Our lives, our thoughts, our actions, and so on. We can also learn from Jacob's story that people in the Bible wrestled with God in ways other than physical ones. There's nothing wrong with having questions and wanting to learn more about the Bible. Christian faith is not blind, but rather founded on how God has provided for us in the past. We can fight Him and still come out with a new identity. Keep in mind what God did when He wrestled Jacob. Jacob spent the night anticipating Esau's arrival. He was terrified and desperate, but he came out of the night with God's blessing and a renewed faith. All of our faith-based struggles with God lead to peace. When we need God's comfort, He sometimes sends it in unexpected and even unwanted packages. God even inflicted a crippling injury on Jacob. This made Jacob even more vulnerable to Esau, forcing Jacob's faith to rest more fully on God rather than himself. If necessary, God will make us limp in order to strengthen our faith. Finally, Jacob's identity was altered as a result of his wrestling with God. He was no longer to be remembered as someone who obtained his blessing through deception. He received God's blessing this time because he prevailed with God through faith. When God calls us to wrestle with Him, there is always more going on than we realize. and God always uses it to transform us for the better. We can only receive the power of conversion and transformation through Him, as well as the gift of not only surrender, but also freedom, as well as the gifts of endurance, faith, and courage. Finally, Jacob does what we must all do. He confronts his failures, weaknesses, sins, and all that is hurting him, and faces God. Jacob fought with God all night. He was paralyzed as a result of his exhausting struggle. Only after he had come to terms with God and stopped struggling, realizing that he couldn't go on without Him, did he receive God's blessing. This remarkable incident in Jacob's life teaches us that our lives are never meant to be easy. This is especially true when we decide to wrestle with God and His will for our lives on our own. We also learn that as Christians, despite our trials and tribulations, our efforts in this life are never without God's presence, and His blessing inevitably follows the struggle, which can be messy and chaotic at times. True growth experiences are always accompanied by struggle and pain. Jacob's wrestling match with God at the Jabbok that dark night reminds us of this truth. While we may oppose God and His will for us, God is in fact very good. As Christians, we may struggle with Him through the loneliness of the night, but His blessing will come by daybreak. Jacob ran into his brother Esau after his wrestling match. Instead of killing him, his brother greeted him with a hug and tears of joy. Esau had reconciled with his brother. Jacob was spared death. Esau didn't want any of the possessions Jacob offered him, though he accepted them at Jacob's request. He only wanted to be on good terms with his brother. The rest of Jacob's story isn't a happy ending. He would eventually lose his beloved wife Rachel during childbirth. His favorite son would be sold into slavery after being betrayed by his older brothers. Jacob's life comes to an end in a foreign land. Throughout it all, God reminds Jacob that He is with him and that His promises are true, even if he doesn't see how they are possible at the time. What parts of Jacob's story do you identify with as you read the account of his wrestling match? Where in your life do you need to ask for forgiveness?